Jeff Lichtman, your focus was on student opinions towards a number of different issues, everything from, I guess, gun control to health care, balanced budget amendments, and the like, as well as taking a look at the future of what Ivy Leagues expected the year 2010 to be. Was there anything particularly interesting or particularly relevant about what you found?
Yes, and I'm going to first focus on current beliefs and then project that into the future. Currently, we see a very liberal and very democratic Ivy League. Democrats outnumber conservatives 2-1. And in the past, the 18 to 24-year-olds have traditionally been a Republican cohort gaining support within the Republican Party since the 70s. But here, we see quite a different number. 59% of the Ivy League students supported President Clinton in the 1992 election, with President Bush receiving only 15% of the vote and Ross Perot receiving 6%. However, these students are not bound by their ideological terms. They are thinkers whose political beliefs bridge the gap between the traditional liberal and conservative frameworks. They're disregarding labels with a new emerging attitude that will alter the political landscape in the future. And this is evident by some of the responses to specific issues such as social liberal issues. For example, 84% of Ivy League students are pro-choice. 73% support gays in the military. 73% also favor taxing individuals making $150,000 or more, even those students whose families would suffer as a result. Additionally, across all racial lines, there was support at 59% of affirmative action. Yet, these are students who want to be a partner, who want the government, to become a partner in improving social conditions, but yet they accept the need to place limits on the government. They are not blind to certain realities that big institutions and bureaucracies can sometimes actually hurt efforts. And this is seen in other statistics which show that 3/4 of the students favor a balanced budget amendment, as well as 2/3 supporting term limits and 2/3 also supporting public school choice. And finally, although these people are traditionally liberal and traditionally democratic, one interesting statistic is to find that 59% of these people favor the death penalty, traditionally a very conservative belief. Looking forward, the impact of the youth can be measured by some of their attitudes and beliefs towards the future. We asked the students to think about what America will be like in the year 2010. And before I move into that, are there any questions so far?
My name is Joanna Fine. Why did you choose the year 2010?
When we get onto the statistics, I'll get into that. And the reason we chose 2010 are for two reasons. One, it's far enough into the future to force people to think about what changes might exist in America and force them to really think about that some more. And the second reason is because this is the point where students will be at their median age, between 38 and 40, where people will have the opportunity to have a profound impact on the political landscape and on the activities that they're involved in at that time.
Hi, my name is Jessica Pollack. Because Penn has a large and pretty renowned business school and the students tend to be a little bit more conservative, how did that affect Penn's poll?
Well, Penn was actually one of the more conservative schools, as you might expect. Along with Princeton and Dartmouth, we came out as the third most conservative. And business majors traditionally are conservative across the board. It's interesting to look at the statistics comparing business and economic majors versus, say, English and fine arts majors. And you find across the line, down the line, on every single issue that business and economic majors are much more conservative. In some of these issues, for example, term limits and balanced budget amendment, the English majors and fine arts majors still support it, but it's to a lesser degree.
One more, perhaps.
Hi, my name is Mark Trachtenberg. I was just wondering if you knew what percentage of Ivy League students actually turned out and voted in the last election?
Actually, we had a very high percentage of voter turnout. If I can remember correctly, only 11% said they either were not registered or did not vote. So of those people who were registered, we had an extremely high voter turnout. Looking to 2010, there are clearly mixed feelings. Despite the fact that 77% are angry with current conditions and 63% don't trust their government, this doesn't translate in the sense that only 35% are afraid of the future, and only 39% want a significant amount of change. These are not students who will have graduated from the School of Hard Knocks. These are supposed to be the leaders of tomorrow. Yet, even they have bought into the myth that America is going to be on the decline. For instance, America has been the #1 country in the world since World War II, and yet, these Ivy students, 6 out of every 10 students in the Ivies believe that America will not be the most powerful country come 2010. Furthermore, almost 3 times the amount of people accept the fact that they will have to work harder than their parents in the future. Students predict that crime, poverty, drugs, and the environment will all be worse in the future, with only education and race relations improving. Ultimately, however, even if America adopted every single policy that these students think are necessary, still 4 in 10 are convinced that America will not be the most powerful country come in the year 2010. As Mark Twain said, there's nothing sadder than a young pessimist.
Thank you, Jeff. The part that I found most interesting, other than the current affairs, was what we've labeled sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I'd like to turn to Lisa Nass. There's a part of the Ivy League that you don't read about in the brochures, that you don't get in the college catalogs, the part that the parents don't want to talk about, and other than the Daily Pennsylvanian, most universities don't want to talk about. What is going on with the behavior of Ivy League students right now?
That's what we found most interesting. When you think of the image of a typical Ivy League student, people usually conjure up images of students studying till the wee hours of the morning in the library, participating in extracurricular activities, or discussing lofty issues with their professors. But upon closer analysis, we found that there's an other side to the Ivy League education. That's the sex, drugs, and rock and roll aspects. Normally, when parents pack their children off to go to college in the fall, they supply them with laundry detergent, clothing, and books. But when they return home in the spring, these students soon have new essentials, such as a 6-pack, condoms, and a bong. We see that much happens to students during their 4 years in an Ivy League institution. Overall, we found that the Ivy League environment encourages sexual promiscuity, drug use, and alcohol abuse. And you can especially see this most clearly when you examine the differences between a freshman's experimentation and a senior's experimentation. First, we look at the area of sexual activity. We see that among 17-year-old freshmen, 60% of them are virgins. But by the time they're seniors, as 22-year-olds, only 12% of them are still virgins. Obviously, the days of Harriet and Ozzie and Harriet are dead. Then we look at the area of drug use, and we see very clearly here that twice as many seniors have tried marijuana as freshmen have. Obviously, there's a lot more experimentation going on the longer you spend in an Ivy League institution.
I'd be tempted to ask these people who smoked pot, but I imagine with a TV camera here, you'd be less than honest, so.
And lastly, we look at the area of alcohol use, and we see that almost 2/3 of graduating seniors will be considered regular drinkers. Obviously, the longer students spend at these Ivy League institutions, the more likely they are to engage in all 3 of these activities. The next thing that we found to be most interesting are certain myths which people have that the evidence we obtained dispelled. The first myth that many people believe are that drugs and alcohol are problems of the poor. Yet among the Ivy League students, it's actually quite the contrary. The wealthier a student is, the more likely he or she is to smoke marijuana or drink alcohol. We also see that many people harbor a myth that those people who are minorities are more likely to smoke marijuana and to drink more. But we actually once again found the opposite in the Ivy League. We found that those students who are white are much, much more likely to smoke marijuana and drink more often. We see that among whites, drugs and alcohol are the drug of choice. Another myth that many people harbor is that certain religious groups, such as Catholics, are less likely to engage in sexual activity. And much to the chagrin of the Catholic Church, we found quite the contrary. We found that Catholics are the youngest people to lose their virginity, and they also consider themselves to be the most sexually promiscuous. Another myth which many people have are that Jewish students spend the most time studying. And once again, we found the opposite. Jewish students are most likely to be regular drinkers and most likely to try experimenting with marijuana. So overall, we see that many myths that people have across general racial boundaries and and many racial boundaries have been broken down among the Ivy League. The last area that we analyze that is most important is that of parental influence. And we see overall that what a parent does greatly influences a child's behavior. We see overall that pot-smoking parents produce pot-smoking kids. Students who believe that their parents smoke pot are twice as likely to smoke pot as those who believe their parents did not. We see this also in the realms of beliefs about premarital sex. 92% of students whose parents had premarital sex approve of premarital sex themselves. We can basically say from this, we can warn parents and tell them, either you can be honest and know your children are going to engage in these activities, or perhaps we should suggest to parents who have engaged in such activities to lie to their children. It prevents a very interesting dilemma to many parents who are out there. I'll open it up now to any questions.
Right here.
Hi, my name's Todd Davison. I'm just curious, you said that once people go off to Ivy League schools, they're twice as likely to drink or try marijuana. I'm curious why that's something specific just to an Ivy League. I would imagine that when people go away to school, they have more access to things such as drugs and alcohol, and I'm curious why that's more pertinent to the Ivy Leagues than another institution.
I totally agree with you on that, and we do agree that it probably is widespread among most college campuses, but what is unique is that most people believe that Ivy League students, because they are the elites and the more intellectual students, probably would refrain from engaging in these activities. But what we did is we looked up some other surveys that were done on a national scale, and we see that, for example, in the area of drug use, a survey done by the University of Michigan showed that the drug use at Penn is similar to the drug use across the country. The drug use at Ivy League schools is similar to drug use across the country. So what we did is we were able to show you that just because these students are very intelligent, just because they study a lot, apparently it's not precluding them from having the same social lives as you see across the country.
My name is Nathaniel Cade, and I'd like to ask you, you said that the Ivy Leagues promote sexual promiscuity. Do you have any data to compare that to college-aged kids across the country? As Todd was saying about the question about drugs and other things, just the fact that you're away in an institution away from your parents, don't you think that promotes sexual promiscuity?
I agree with you on that. I think the main thing that we are trying to prove here is that we are trying to show you that just because people have an image of students being a certain way, that obviously the Ivy League students are no different than anybody else. They're engaging, the future leaders of tomorrow today are smoking marijuana. The future leaders of tomorrow are very sexually promiscuous. These things are very interesting to realize in light of the fact that many of these people are going to go on to become our Supreme Court justices, to become our senators.
We need to move on.
Hi, I'm Eliza Feuerstein. I was wondering if there was any correlation in your survey between the numbers of members of the Greek system who used drugs and alcohol and were sexually promiscuous versus those who were not Greek.
Those overall who either went out more or who belonged to social clubs are much more likely to engage in all these activities. And as a side note, those who belong to social clubs, such as fraternities and sororities, also had the lowest GPAs. Yeah, overall, that's the basic thing. You see that among the Ivy League, the environment itself does foster these activities. And for those parents who are sending their children off just to college, they should beware.
Josh Joseph, your focus was on religion. How religious the Ivy Leagues are, some of the different breakdowns